on Thursday, we like to celebrate Math Tuesday.
Math Tuesday.
It's Math Tuesday here on Texas Football Today, where we dive inside the numbers. And we reported on Monday, we talked about it, the passing of Ken Hall. Ken Hall, the Sugar Land Express, the state's all-time leading rusher, who has both the career Texas high school football rushing record that has stood for more than 70 years, and the single-season rushing record that has stood for more than 70 years. Absolutely remarkable. We talked about him and his legacy on Monday when we were doing some headlines, but I got on a kick, as I want to do, and I started looking through and trying to dig through the remarkable numbers that defined Ken Hall, that have made him such a lasting part of the Texas high school football lore. And I can tell you the top line numbers, right? He ran for more than 4,000 yards in 1953. Pretty crazy. I can tell you that he has more than 11,000 yards in his career. Pretty crazy. But I also feel like that requires context, because I think that first of all, I think there's two sides of it. There are people who would say, yeah, but he was even better than that because he had played in fewer games, which is true. There are also people who will say, yeah, but he was playing in Class B in the 50s. Like, I mean, what does that necessarily mean? And I think both of these arguments are reasonable. And so I wanted to dig inside the numbers and talk a little bit more about Ken Hall and what he wanted to do. So as a baseline, here's where we're going to start. Let's just take a look at the all-time single-season rushing yards leaders in Texas high school football history. UIL 11, man. And here it is. If you've never seen this list before, here you go. These are the people who have run for the most yards in a single season. And you see at the top, Ken Hall, 4,045 yards, the only 4,000-yard rusher in Texas high school football history. The rest of this list is really interesting. First of all, you've got three guys who were all within 3 yards of one another in the same year in 2011. Trey Williams at Spring Decaney, Jonathan Gray at Aledo, and Joseph Sadler at Devine. All within 3 yards of one another, which is wild for second, third, and fourth place on this list. They're in the high 3,800s. Rodney Thomas, the legendary Rodney Thomas there, and in 1990 ran for 3,700 yards. Wes Danaher, the son of the legendary Phil Danaher, down there, a legend in his own right, ran for nearly 3,600 yards in 1995. How about from this year? John Hebert, the running back from Houston Strake Jesuit, clocks in with the 7th all-time greatest rushing season in Texas high school football history. Is that right? Yeah, that's right, 7th at 3,542. He just beat out Jonathan Brooks back in 2020. I know it was a relatively forgettable year, but Jonathan Brooks was absolutely remarkable. 3,530 rushing yards for Jonathan Brooks. And then, of course, the legendary Cedric Benson in 1999 running for 3,526. Those are the top 9 all-time single-season rushing yards. And so, before you go to the next one, this is, I think if you just stop there, you'd be like, oh, Ken Hall, pretty remarkable. Like, that is a record that has stood for more than 70 years. Nobody has run for more than 4,000 yards in a season. But one of the things about Ken Hall is that playing in Class B in the early 1950s, there was not a state championship. There were not state playoffs in the UIL in Class B. Instead, the highest achievement that you could have would be a regional championship. Okay, you would go and like the teams within your region would send a team to the playoffs, and there were 2 rounds of playoffs, and if you finished it, there was like a Final Four, and then if you finished it, then you were that was your quote unquote state champ, right? You were the regional champion, and they won 3 consecutive regional championships in 1951, 1952, and 1953. All that is to say, Ken Hall only played 12 games when he ran for 4,000 yards. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to take a look at every running back in Texas high school football history who has run for at least 3,100 yards in a season. Okay, 3,100 yards. And there's only like 50 of them that have run for 3,100 yards. And then I want to calculate their yards per game. Okay, plain and simple. How many yards per game did you run for in that season? And you're going to notice something here. Okay? At the top, of course, needless to say, Ken Hall, 1953, ran for 4,445 yards in 12 games, a 337 yard per game average. Absolutely stupid. In second place, Ken Hall in 1952, when he ran for 3,458 yards in 12 games, 288.2. He is the single season yards per game leader, and he's also second place. And by the way, look at the bottom of this list. Ken Hall, 1951, in ninth place. Okay? As a sophomore, ran for 3,160 yards in 12 games. If Ken Hall had retired from football after his sophomore season, he would still be seventh all-time in UIL 11-man history for yards per game in a season. And then all he did after that was put together the best season that we'd ever seen, and then the best season that we had ever seen after that. Which, by the way, if you're interested, look at that. Joseph Sadler is in third. He ran for those 3,877 yards in just 14 games. He edges out John Hebert at Houston Strake Jesuit from just this past year, 272.5 yards. Buddy Hansen at Tom Bean back in 2003 was unstoppable, 268.8 yards per game. Edging out Trevor Spates, a legend down there in McAllen, at McAllen Memorial in 2015, nearly 3,200 yards. Dawson Pendergrass, now at Baylor, was absolutely remarkable there in 2022. Ran for nearly 266 yards a season, as did Aaron Dumas in 2019 at El Paso Americas. And so that just tells you, of the top 9 single season rushing yards per game averages, Ken Hall has 3 of them. 3 of them. And they've lasted for 70 years. And so let's now zoom in on Ken Hall's career as a whole. We'll just take a look at what Ken Hall's career looked like by the numbers. And so his freshman year, as a freshman, he didn't get a ton of carries. Played in 9 games. They went 4-5. Didn't make the playoffs. Ran for 589 yards. Okay? But then you see those yards per game averages, right? 3,263 yards, 288 yards, 337 yards. So for his career, including a really pretty mediocre, nothing to write home about freshman year, he averaged nearly 250 yards per game over the course of his 45 games. Absolutely stunning. But here's the thing about this, okay? And this is my final point about Ken Hall and his greatness, and why I think there's an argument to be made that he's the greatest player in Texas high school football history. So we talked about how he accomplished all of those things in 12 games. You see 11-0-1 in 1951, 11-1 in 1952, 12-0 in 1953. 12 games each of those years. Obviously, at 4-5 his freshman year, they wouldn't have been eligible for the playoffs. But what if he was playing in a 16-game season? What if he was able to do what players in today's era are able to do and play 16 games? Okay? And so I extrapolated it. Okay? His sophomore year, he would be the single season rushing record, 4,212, if he had run for over 16 games. It would have been even better, obviously, as a junior, 4,600 yards. And in 1953, if he had played 16 games at that pace, he would run for nearly 5,400 yards. 5,400 yards. If he was able to play if he was playing in the 16-game era, Ken Hall would have come close to 15,000 yards. A reminder that over the course of the last 70 years, nobody has run for 11,000 yards when they've had an opportunity to play as many as 16 games a season. Ken Hall would have been close to 15,000, a full extra season more than a lot of these guys. And so I understand that there are people who are going to say, well, yeah, he was playing at Sugar Land in Class B in 2000 in the early 1950s. And I hear you. The game has changed. But I am here to tell you that these numbers that Ken Hall put up during his iconic Texas high school football career, I think there's an argument to be made he's the greatest player in Texas high school football history. What he did from a rate stat perspective is stunning, and nobody's come close to it. Nobody's even whiffed at it. And I made this point on Monday. I do believe that at some point, his career rushing record is going to fall. Just because you think about that, with 16 games, these players will have an opportunity to play as many as, 12 times 4 is 40. 16 times 4. Oh, this is bad. I'm doing math on the fly. 64 games.
Math is hard.
On Math Tuesday. 64 games. There's theoretically, every player who starts as a freshman could play in 19 more games than Ken Hall did. Okay? And so at some point, if you have a player who is a workhorse running back over the course of 4 years and they make deep playoff runs, he doesn't even have to average 250 yards a game to break Ken Hall's record. I do think his career record may fall one day. But that 4,000 yard mark in 1953, and I would even say what he did in 1951, 1952, those stand up as some of the greatest seasons in Texas high school football history. So I wanted to take an opportunity to honor Ken Hall and to really put in perspective just how remarkable he was as a player. Ken Hall passed away this weekend at the age of 89, the Sugarland Express. That's Math Tuesday. We're Texas Football today. Thank you.